Hi, my name's Adeline. When I was 11, my parents dropped me off at a foster home like I was a bill they forgot to pay. They said they couldn't afford me, but they kept my sister. Posted online. Letting go of burdens brings peace. I was that burden. 15 years later, they showed up. Not with an apology, but with a favor to ask. And before we begin, where are you listening from? What time is it over there? Drop a comment. We'd love to hear. Because sometimes, the ones you call family only remember your name when they need saving. Want to know what I did when they came knocking? Let's begin. The letter sat on my dashboard like it weighed 100 pounds. Plain white envelope. No return address. Just my name in my father's handwriting. Still sharp, still the same rigid slant it always had. I hadn't opened it. I just stared at it while the retirement complex loomed outside my windshield, its beige brick walls as lifeless as I remembered them. 15 years later, I was back, and my hands still trembled like they did that day in the car. It was a Sunday afternoon, just warm enough that the air through the cracked window smelled like sweetgrass and sun-warmed leather. I was 11. My mom was in the passenger seat, flipping through a pamphlet I couldn't read. Dad had both hands on the wheel, but hadn't said a word the whole ride. They told me we were going on a little trip. Just a visit, my mom had said, brushing crumbs off my jeans. To see someone special. She smiled too wide, like the grin you wear when something isn't right but you're trying too hard to make it look normal. Cassia, my little sister, hadn't come along. She was home with Grandma. That should have been my first clue. We were almost 2 hours outside of town before I realized I didn't have my school books. My glove was missing too. My favorite mitt, the one with the faded blue laces Dad said made me a lefty worth keeping. I looked back at the duffel on the seat. It wasn't packed with care. It was rushed, sloppy, just a few shirts, one pair of jeans, mismatched socks. Nothing that said, "You're coming home again." I remember the sun bouncing off the car mirror as we pulled into a gravel driveway. The place looked like an old motel converted into something else. A wooden sign near the mailbox read, "Willow Acres Group Home." The letters were peeling. One kid was dragging a trash bag down the sidewalk, barefoot. Another sat in the dirt, sobbing over a broken action figure, the arm twisted like it had been yanked too hard. No one looked happy. No one looked like they were just visiting. I turned to Mom, but she had already unbuckled her seatbelt. "We're here," she said, too cheerfully. "This will be good for you." I remember how quiet Dad was. Eyes fixed on the windshield like he didn't have the guts to look at me. My stomach dropped. Something was wrong. I knew it. And I think they knew I knew. But nobody said anything. A woman in floral print came out to greet us. She had the kind of smile that felt like it was meant for someone else's kid. "You must be Rowan," she chirped. "We've got a great room ready for you. Come on inside, sweetie." That word, sweetie, made me feel small. Smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. "I don't understand," I said, looking between them. "When are we going home?" Mom avoided my eyes. "We'll check on you soon. You'll make new friends. You're brave, remember?" Dad stood beside the car but didn't come close. He looked like he was late for something, like the moment couldn't end fast enough. "Be good," he said, without emotion. Then they walked back to the car. I ran forward, panicking, heart hammering in my chest. "Wait, what about Cassia? Why didn't she come?" No answer. Just the soft slam of car doors, and then the sound of tires crunching gravel. The last thing I saw were their red taillights fading into the distance. They didn't look back. That night, I didn't cry at first. I couldn't. My body was too stunned, too cold, too confused to understand what had just happened. They showed me a mattress, thin, covered in plastic, smelled like bleach and something else I couldn't place. Maybe sadness. I curled up with Mr. Silas. a stuffed tiger Cassia had given me for my birthday. He still smelled faintly like her, strawberries and fabric softener. I held him tight like he could answer every question bouncing around in my brain. A boy in the next bed cried into his pillow all night. I didn't know his name, just that his tears sounded like mine felt. I whispered into the dark, barely loud enough to hear myself. Why did they leave me? Was it because I forgot to clean the kitchen last week? Because I broke that vase chasing the dog? Was it my grades? I had tried. Maybe not hard enough. The thoughts spun until they knotted in my chest. No matter what I thought of, it all led to the same sickening conclusion. I'd done something wrong, and this was my punishment. The next morning, a woman in scrubs handed me a Ziploc bag with my name on it. "This was all we got," she said. Inside was a worn-down teddy bear, one ear chewed off from years ago when the dog mistook it for a toy. No note, no card, not even a scribble on the bag. That same afternoon, I used one of the home's shared computers for schoolwork. Just a few clicks, and there it was, my mom's Facebook page. She'd posted a picture of Cassia holding a bouquet, smiling wide at a school assembly I hadn't even known was happening. The caption read, "Letting go of burdens brings peace." And in that instant, I understood exactly who the burden was. By the time the taillights disappeared behind the trees, the gravel had settled, and the air was still again. No one came back. Not after 5 minutes, not after 5 hours. Just the sound of bugs outside the screen door and the clink of silverware behind the kitchen wall. The next morning started with a metal spoon scraping over a plastic tray. I sat at the end of a table with 4 other kids, all around my age or maybe older. It was hard to tell. No one talked. One boy was stuffing jelly packets into his hoodie pocket like it was currency. Another girl with tangled hair just stared into her cereal, not blinking. The woman who handed out the food, Ms. Jackie, talked in a sing-song voice, like she thought pretending everything was cheerful would actually make it so. "Eat up, babies. It's a good day to be full." I nodded when she looked at me, just like I did when anyone spoke to me now. Smile, nod, do what's expected. I chewed slowly, counting the crunches. I didn't taste anything. I wasn't even sure if I was hungry. My body moved, but it wasn't connected to me anymore, like I'd been cut loose, floating outside myself, watching someone else wear my face. That afternoon, I made my bed like I was told. Tight corners, pillow fluffed. I lined up my shoes against the wall and folded the shirts they gave me. "Yes, ma'am," I said when the staff called my name. I shared my turn on the Xbox with the kid who kicked the wall at bedtime. I even gave up the last pudding cup on Tuesday night without being asked. Maybe if I did everything right, if I didn't make trouble, if I stayed good, they'd realize it was a mistake, that they forgot me, that I was meant to go home. During her weekly visit, the caseworker sat across from me in the common room, her eyes flicked between her clipboard and her phone. I waited until she stopped typing. "So, when are my parents coming to pick me up?" She blinked, her mouth caught halfway open like she hadn't expected the question. Then she smiled, too soft, too slow, and said, "Let's focus on getting you settled, okay?" I nodded again. Settled. Like dust. A few days passed. Maybe more. The clocks on the walls didn't seem to matter here. They just marked time in noise, not meaning. It rained once, and the hallway smelled like old socks and bleach. We weren't allowed outside that day, so I sat by the window and traced raindrops on the glass with my finger. Then came Thursday. I woke up before the alarm and stayed perfectly still in bed. I knew the date. July 14th. My birthday. I didn't say anything at breakfast. Ms. Jackie served powdered eggs and stale toast like any other day. I waited, hopeful. Maybe they told her. Maybe she'd bring out something. A card, a cupcake, one of those flimsy paper hats from the dollar store. But breakfast ended, then lunch, then dinner. Nobody said a word. I kept glancing at the front door. I told myself, maybe they're coming late. Some people work late. Maybe they had traffic. Maybe they wanted to surprise me. But by bedtime, I knew. No call, no visit, no mention of my name. And then, as the lights went out in the bunk room, I heard one of the boys across the hall whisper to someone else, not even bothering to keep his voice down. I heard his family gave him up. That's what people do when they don't want you anymore. I didn't move, didn't say a word, just curled tighter under the thin blanket, letting the scratchy fibers bite into my skin. I held Mr. Silas, the stuffed tiger, close to my chest, the only thing left that remembered me. Even the kids here knew. I'd been left. It was late that night when one of the older girls, Raya, who was 15 and not afraid of anything, snuck into the common room with a smuggled tablet. She let a few of us crowd around while she checked her Instagram feed, acting like it was some kind of nightly ritual. I leaned over just enough to whisper, "Can you search for someone for me?" She raised an eyebrow. "Depends? Who?" "My mom. Just her name. Please." She sighed, tapped in the letters. There it was. Her profile picture popped up. Her and Cassia, sitting at some fancy-looking table. Balloons in the background. A cake with pink frosting and sparkler candles shaped like the number 10. The caption read, "Happy birthday to our precious girl. Our whole world. You deserve everything." I stared. My stomach tightened until I couldn't breathe right. That was today. We used to share it. Cassia was born on my birthday, 2 years apart. Every year we had one cake, one party, one set of matching candles. She'd blow out the first number, I'd blow out the second. That was our thing. Now she had the whole cake. I whispered so quietly I barely heard myself. They forgot me. Or maybe they didn't forget. Maybe they remembered and did it anyway. That stung worse than anything else. The screen dimmed, then blacked out. The battery had died, but I didn't stop staring. The image burned behind my eyes. No one had said my name all day. Not once. Not when they called out chores. Not at dinner. Not at lights out. I guess they kept the daughter and left the burden. That night, I didn't cry. Not even once. I just folded in. Like something inside me gave up trying to hold it all together. And that was the night I stopped asking why. Days turned into years in the foster system, and somehow I made it through without turning into something mean. Maybe that was luck, or maybe it was people like the Jarmans. I was 14 when I moved in with them. Their house smelled like old books and lemon polish, and there were doilies on every side table. But there was also warmth, like you could breathe without flinching. They gave me a room, not a bed, not a cot in a group home, but a real room, with shelves, a desk, even a soft green comforter that didn't smell like bleach. Mrs. Jarman was a retired English teacher. She woke me up on cold mornings with socks in her hand, warm from the dryer. "Can't have frozen feet before algebra," she'd hum. Mr. Jarman taught me chess on Saturday mornings. He'd mutter, "Control the center, Rowan," every time I moved too fast. They never asked me to call them Mom or Dad. I never did, but I didn't hide from them either. I earned solid grades, helped Mr. Jarman fix the mailbox after a storm one weekend, volunteered at the library shelving returns. When the librarian asked if I wanted to apply for the teen program, I said yes without thinking, and I meant it. I still carried Cassia's picture in my wallet, though. One from when she was 9. She had a tooth missing and was holding a sparkler, her hair pulled back with butterfly clips. She hadn't changed in my head. Frozen there like a memory I refused to let rot. One night, after dinner, Mrs. Jarman was folding laundry on the couch. She didn't look up when she asked it. "Do you want to reach out to them?" Them. She didn't say, "Your family," just them. I shrugged and reached for my water. "They know where I am." She nodded slowly. Didn't push. Just kept folding socks into perfect pairs. 3 weeks later, the call came. It was close to 5 in the evening when I answered the house phone, one of those landlines they still kept by the kitchen. The voice on the other end belonged to a social worker I barely remembered. Polite, detached. She said my maternal grandmother had passed. I stopped stirring the chili on the stove. "Grandma C?" I asked, even though I already knew. "From Missouri?" "Yes," the voice said gently. "She passed in her sleep last Tuesday." Grandma C. The one who used to bake peach pies with me in summer, who always smelled like cinnamon and mint gum, who taught me to whistle through my fingers and told me my mom was spirited but misguided. I gripped the edge of the counter. Will my parents, will they be at the funeral? There was a pause. They said they'll send flowers, but they won't be attending. Silence settled between us, thick and bitter. I hung up without saying anything else. That night, I ironed my own shirt, one of the ones Mrs. Jarman had bought on clearance last spring, white with a little pinstripe. I combed my hair, polished my shoes, packed a bag quietly. Mr. Jarman didn't ask questions. He just started the car the next morning at 6:00 a.m., sharp, and drove the 5 hours to the church in Missouri like it was the most normal thing in the world. I watched the landscape blur through the passenger window, holding a paper bag with 2 cold ham sandwiches and a bottle of ginger ale. At the service, I sat alone. No familiar faces, just a few older women who whispered to each other and didn't recognize me. The casket was closed, surrounded by artificial roses in glass vases. There was no photo slideshow, no eulogy, just hymns and quiet coughing. Afterwards, I stood by the grave and waited. I thought maybe a car would pull up. Maybe I'd see Cassia's curls or my mom's red scarf. Something. Anything. But no one came. The wind picked up. A little dirt blew across my shoes. I didn't cry. On the way home, I leaned against the window and watched the road like it might split open and swallow us whole. Later that night, in my room, I pulled out my phone and opened Cassia's profile. Her newest post was already gathering likes by the dozens. There she was, on a beach somewhere, laughing with a flower crown on her head, her feet in the water, my mother behind her, holding a coconut drink, tan and smiling. The caption read, "Mom says Hawaii is healing for the soul. We needed it." First. The funeral had been 2 days ago. I stared at the screen. Healing for the soul. That's what they were doing while Grandma C was lowered into the ground without a single word from the people who claimed her, without a goodbye, without a presence. Not even death had been enough to bring them back. I turned the phone face down and didn't touch it for the rest of the night. I didn't want to see it light up. I didn't want to see Cassia's smile. I didn't want to imagine what her voice might sound like now, 3 years older. I sat in the dark, still dressed from the funeral, tie loosened, socks damp. There was a picture of Grandma C in the envelope they gave me at the service. An old one, creased and fading. She was holding me when I was maybe 2, both of us grinning, smeared with flour. That photo stayed on my desk for a long time. But that night was the last time I looked at my family's social media. I stopped checking, stopped waiting. And when school started again, and the secretary handed me a standard yellow form titled Emergency Contact Information, I didn't flinch. I took the pen, and in the blank under Primary Contact, I wrote, Rowan Jarman, self. Mr. Jarman had this habit of walking through the library at closing time, whistling an old tune I never recognized. That night, his steps creaked a little more than usual on the worn linoleum as he approached my desk. I was hunched over my laptop, staring at a blank document with the words "Personal Statement" blinking in the top corner. 3 cups of vending machine coffee sat cold beside me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard like they'd forgotten what words were. "Rowan," he said, sliding a sealed envelope onto the desk. "Thought this might help." I opened it after he walked away. His handwriting was neat, deliberate. No crossed-out lines. Just, "Rowan has never had the luxury of excuses, only the discipline of showing up." I read that line again, and again. I didn't know what to call the feeling it gave me, but it made the cursor on the screen less threatening. So I started typing. I applied to 5 colleges that fall. Got into 3. Picked the one in Kansas City with a social policy track and a nonprofit focus. It wasn't flashy, but it felt right, like it might lead somewhere I could make things better for kids who didn't get lucky with families. In my essay, I wrote, "I come from absence." That's it. No sob stories, no names, just the truth, straight and spare. It didn't feel bitter. It felt clean, like breathing without a weight on your chest. The night I got my acceptance email, I sat alone on the back porch. The air was cold enough to sting, and I held the phone like it was something fragile. I didn't tell anyone right away. I let it be mine for a while. A quiet kind of pride. 2 weeks later, she came back. It started with a ding in my inbox. The subject line read, "Hey, it's Cassia." I just stared at it. At the school domain address. At the date. She was 18 now, a senior too. Her message was short. "Hey, it's been a while. I know we never really talked after you left. I need help. Not from them. From you." I didn't move for a full minute. Just sat there in the library, the screen glowing in my face like a ghost. My fingers hovered. Then I typed, "What do you need?" I hit send before I could overthink it. Then I waited. A day. 2. 3. Nothing. I started to wonder if she regretted reaching out, if maybe my message felt too distant or too eager. I didn't know, and I didn't ask. But on the 4th day, I got another message. Not from her, just a forwarded link, one of those fundraiser pages. GoFundMe. At the top, there was a picture of my mother in a hospital bed. Next to her, Cassia smiled weakly, holding her hand. The caption said, "My mom's been battling chronic illness. Insurance isn't enough. We're doing everything we can." I scrolled. Below the photo was the message, "Please help us cover Mom's medical bills. Every little bit helps. It's just been the 3 of us since forever. We're each other's whole world." I read that line twice. Then again, just the 3 of us. No mention of me, not even a "my brother moved away" or "our family's been through a lot." Just erased. Mr. Jarman was shelving the classics nearby. He saw my face, paused, then walked over and looked at the screen. He didn't ask, just read. Quiet. Then, gently, "She doesn't know better, son. But you do." I nodded, but I couldn't stop staring at the words. We're each other's whole world. Like I'd never existed. Like Grandma C hadn't. Like the nights I held Cassia's hand when she cried about monsters under the bed were just vapor. I left the library early that night, told Mr. Jarman I was tired, walked home with my hands in my pockets, the wind tugging at my hoodie like it was trying to pull me back to somewhere I didn't belong anymore. At home, I stood in my room, staring at the screen again. I clicked on the names of people who'd donated. Some I remembered. Some I didn't. Old neighbors, a couple of Cassia's classmates, one teacher who used to confuse us with each other in the hall. Then I found her email, just sitting there, unread now. Pointless. I clicked delete, and for the first time in a long while I said her name out loud, quietly. Cassia. It felt strange, like tasting a word you haven't spoken in years. Soft, Wrong. Then I whispered, I hope she's okay. And I meant it. But I also knew I wasn't part of that world anymore. I did just that. Kansas City was quieter than I'd expected, not in volume, but in demand. I found an old brick apartment on the east side, modest, a little crooked in the floorboards, but it stayed warm in the winter, and I could afford it. The walls didn't echo with someone else's expectations. That alone made it worth every dime. I worked days at the nonprofit. Next step forward, we helped teens aging out of foster care. The paperwork was never-ending, and the funding was always on the edge of falling apart. But the kids, they were the reason. Especially Isaiah, a bright-eyed 17-year-old with a smart mouth and a backpack full of eviction notices. He reminded me of someone, not in looks, but in the way he watched everyone like they might vanish if he blinked. I knew that fear too well. That night, I was catching up on a grant report for the state. My dinner sat untouched on a tray by the couch, just leftover casserole and a small glass of red wine. I'd lit a candle like I always did when working late, more for comfort than smell. The flicker felt like company. Then came the knock. Not loud, not hurried, just there, like a memory wrapped in sound. I stood still for a second. This wasn't a neighborhood where folks dropped by unannounced. Most of my friends texted first. My coworkers knew better than to show up on deadline night, so I opened the door with caution. And there they were, my mother, Caroline, my father, Mitchell, and behind them, Cassia. They looked older, thinner, worn down in the way that isn't just about age. Caroline's hands shook slightly, clutching her purse. Mitchell's coat hung off him like it belonged to someone bigger. Cassia. Her eyes darted to the floor, then past me like she was afraid I'd make her meet them. Rowan, Caroline said first, her voice too bright, too fast. We didn't know where else to go. The air felt thick. They stood like tourists on my porch, taking in the smell of curry from my neighbor's kitchen, the rusted mailbox with my name on it, the life they'd never asked about. Caroline looked past me, trying to peer inside. We saw your name in that article, the Youth Home Program, 10 foster teens placed in jobs and housing. You're doing amazing. Mitchell nodded slowly, half smiling. We could use someone like you, just until we get back on our feet. There it was. Just like that. No apology, no recognition, just need, and entitlement dressed up as praise. I stepped aside, silently, not out of invitation, just to clear the doorway. They walked in like it was still theirs to walk into. Cassia came last, her arms crossed, expression unreadable. I closed the door behind them. The apartment felt suddenly too small. They sat awkwardly on my couch. Caroline's eyes wandered to the framed diploma above the desk. Mitchell stared at the bookshelf, like he was searching for something familiar and finding nothing. I stayed standing. Cassia finally broke the silence. We've been struggling. I waited. After Dad got laid off and Mom's meds weren't covered anymore, we lost the house. I didn't move, just let the words hang there. We didn't know who else to turn to, she added, eyes finally meeting mine. And then we remembered. You're smart. You made it. Caroline chimed in. And family helps family. That's what matters, right? I glanced at the fridge behind me. There was Isaiah's photo from last month's job fair, grinning in a borrowed suit. Beside it, the letter confirming the food pantry's winter grant, and a magnet that said, "Choose who you become." Why now? I asked. Cassia bit her lip. Caroline looked annoyed that I didn't soften. Mitchell said, "We thought maybe you'd let us stay a few days, just till we find something." A silence fell. Not angry, just final. I walked to the drawer near the kitchen, opened it, and pulled out a manila folder I hadn't looked at in years. Still sealed, still sharp at the edges. I set it gently on the table in front of them. Do you remember this? Caroline's hands trembled a little as she touched the folder. Inside were the copies of the custody release, the paperwork that made it official, the day they chose comfort over keeping me. I tapped the highlighted line. You said I was a burden, I said softly, that I was interfering with Cassia's developmental needs. You requested I be placed with extended care. You both signed it. Mitchell looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't. I pointed to the date. I was 11. Cassia blinked fast. Her voice cracked. I was just a kid. I didn't— You were 15, I said. The silence sat heavy again. Caroline reached up to wipe her eyes, trying to reset the moment like erasing a chalkboard. We were scared. We didn't know how to handle things. We were doing our best. You had choices, I said, still calm. You just didn't choose me. I stood up slowly, walked over to the door. You didn't want me when you had comfort, I said, my hand on the knob. You want me now that it's gone. Caroline sniffled. Cassia's shoulders curled in. Mitchell still hadn't said sorry. I opened the door. Let me walk you out. They stared at me for a beat, maybe expecting me to cave, to cry, to offer a couch and forgiveness in the same breath. But I didn't. They stood. Cassia whispered, Rowan, I'm sorry. I nodded once. Didn't say it back. As they stepped into the cold, Caroline turned and said quietly, You're still our son. I didn't answer. I closed the door gently behind them, locked it, turned off the candle, then sat down, finished my dinner cold, and opened the grant report again, and I thought that would be the end. But hurt doesn't knock just once. Sometimes it walks in, takes a seat, and waits until you're finally smiling again, just to remind you it still lives here. 2 weeks passed since they showed up at my door. Kansas City was colder now, a Midwest chill that crept under your sleeves before you noticed. But inside the church hall, warmth buzzed through the air, laughter, music, and the clatter of folding chairs. It was community night, a fundraiser for our foster youth program. I'd helped plan it all year. Silent auction in the back, local jazz trio by the podium, and every table topped with those cheap paper centerpieces the kids made with markers and glue sticks. The pastor, Reverend Talley, clapped a hand on my back. Tonight's about you, Rowan. You turned surviving into leading. You're showing these kids what resilience looks like. I smiled politely. I never liked the spotlight, but I knew what this meant to the kids. Especially to Jared, who spent the whole week practicing his poem for the mic. He was in the front row now, bouncing his leg, eyes wide with nerves and hope. I spotted Isaiah across the room near the buffet, already charming one of the donors into giving twice what they planned. It felt like family here, the kind you build when the one you're born into lets you go. Then I saw them, by the far wall, helping arrange food trays like they belonged, Caroline, Mitchell, and Cassia. Cassia didn't look at me. Mitchell gave a half wave, like this was a neighborhood BBQ and not the life they'd abandoned. Caroline had her hair pinned up, pearls around her neck, smiling at the volunteers like she'd been here from the start. When Reverend Talley saw her, he lit up. "Oh, you didn't tell me your parents were coming," he said. I blinked. I didn't know they would. "They've been amazing," he said. "Helped us all afternoon." My jaw tightened. I forced a nod. Later, he took the stage. And now our keynote speaker tonight is someone I deeply admire. He's the reason some of these kids even have a place to sleep tonight. Please welcome Rowan Miller. Applause. I stepped up. Thanked the crowd, shared a few stories about the program, about Isaiah getting his first apartment, about Jared writing poetry as therapy. And then I said something I hadn't planned. Resilience doesn't mean we don't get hurt. It means we build a life in spite of it, and sometimes we find the family we needed, even if it doesn't look the way we imagined. More applause. I stepped down. And then Caroline stood up. She didn't ask for the mic. She just took it from the side table like it was hers to hold. She smiled at the room, then turned to the crowd like a proud matriarch. Raising Rowan and Cassia was a journey, she began. A lot of joy. A lot of challenges. I froze. Jared was smiling at me. Reverend Tally nodded like he knew what was coming. But we always did our best, Caroline said. Even when life pulled us across the country for work, we had to make hard choices, like when Rowan bravely stayed with a family friend for a few years while we got back on our feet. Cassia stared at the floor. Caroline continued. He never complained. Even as a boy, he was full of grace. We're so proud of him. And I just want to thank this church for giving him a place to shine. The room applauded again. Mitchell clapped too, nodding like a man being honored. I stood there, frozen in my own body. Family friend? A few years? I was placed. I was surrendered. At 11 years old, they handed me to a stranger like I was too much weight for their trunk. And now here they were, rewriting the story. In front of donors, community members, teens who looked up to me. I couldn't even speak. After the event, I slipped outside into the parking lot. The night air bit at my skin, but I needed space. Breathing felt harder inside. Caroline followed. You looked good up there, she said. Really commanding. I turned slowly. Why did you say those things? She blinked. What things? You lied. She rolled her eyes. Rowan, do you want everyone here to think we're monsters? I didn't answer. Mitchell appeared behind her. We showed up tonight. That should count for something. I looked at him, then Cassia, who trailed behind, arms crossed. Cassia murmured, I didn't know she'd say all that. I swear. But you didn't stop her either. She flinched. Caroline stepped forward. You think it's easy, living with the choices we made? We did what we could. No, I said. You did what was convenient, and now you want to edit the parts that make you look bad. Caroline's voice dropped. Do you want to humiliate us? Is that what this is about? I shook my head. I wanted peace, but I'm not going to let you steal the truth. Mitchell scoffed. It was just a few lines in a speech, and every one of them told those kids that your version is the real one. They stared at me. I walked away. Inside, Jared caught up to me near the coat rack. Hey, he said. That was kind of amazing. I didn't know your family was coming. I gave a small smile. Me either. You're lucky, though. I mean, that they came at all. I looked at him, this bright-eyed boy who still hoped for things I'd stopped hoping for. Sometimes, I said, it's luckier when they don't come back. That night, back at my apartment, I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a photo I hadn't touched in years. Darlene, my first foster mother. Hair always pinned, laugh that shook the windows. I held the photo, remembering her voice. You always tell the truth, even if your voice trembles. I turned the picture over. On the back, in faded ink, was the note she left the day I moved out. You are not unwanted. You are unclaimed treasure. I sat there a long time, not crying, just remembering. No, they didn't just rewrite the past. They tried to take my future. 1 week after the fundraiser, I was standing at the back of a sleek event hall in downtown Kansas City, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee and scanning the list of breakout speakers printed in blue ink on a glossy brochure. It was the Midwestern Regional Philanthropy Mixer, an annual gathering for community nonprofits and funders. I was invited through the Youth Housing Coalition I'd partnered with for years. I flipped the brochure open, glancing down the speaker schedule, and froze. Cassia Baird, Regional Community Liaison, Youth Futures Foundation. I blinked hard. That couldn't be right. Under her name was a short bio. Having aged out of the foster care system at 17, Cassia has dedicated her adult life to youth advocacy, policy reform, and transitional housing efforts across Missouri and Kansas. I read it again. Those weren't just vague talking points. Those were my exact words. Lifted from the bio I'd written for the State Youth Summit last fall, my words about aging out, my stats on housing gaps, even the line I'd crafted carefully about systems that punish resilience instead of nurturing it. I set the coffee down. The room was abuzz with friendly chatter, people networking, passing business cards, laughing about ice storms and grant deadlines. I barely heard any of it. My eyes were locked on that name, Cassia Baird, and a life that wasn't hers. At noon, the lights dimmed, and the announcer introduced the speakers. I moved toward the side wall, arms crossed, back against a column. Cassia stepped onto the stage in a navy blazer, heels too sharp for someone who supposedly worked in shelters. She smiled warmly at the crowd. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she began, voice smooth and steady. "At 17, I stood outside a group home with a garbage bag full of my things and nowhere to go. I thought I'd disappear." I stared. "I've slept in cars. I've fought to stay in school. I've watched policy meetings where people talked about us like numbers. But now, I'm at the table, and I'm using every seat I get to fight for the next generation." The crowd murmured in approval. She went on, word for word, about a policy bill I helped draft with a state senator last year. She even told a story about a poetry program for foster teens, one I started with Jared, as if it were her project. I couldn't move. When she finished, the audience clapped. A man near the front rose to his feet. "Your story. Wow, truly heroic." She shook his hand, smiling wide. Then, briefly, her eyes met mine across the room. She froze. I didn't blink, and she turned away. After the event, I waited near the hallway by the restrooms. People filed past, chatting about collaboration and panel workshops. I watched Cassia emerge from a side door, still glowing from the applause, holding a program and a fresh cup of coffee. When she saw me, her shoulders dropped slightly. I didn't waste time. "You really think no one would notice?" I asked, voice low. She glanced around. "Not here." Those were my words. I tweaked some things. "No, you stole them. My life. My resume. That speech was mine." Cassia rolled her eyes. "You weren't using it anymore, and I needed a job." "You needed a lie." Her jaw clenched. "Rowan, they only listen to people who've suffered. They want a sad story and a redemption arc. You already lived it. Why let it go to waste?" I stared at her. She shrugged, folding her arms. "I was qualified, just not dramatic enough. So I borrowed." "It was never yours to borrow." She met my eyes. "It is now," she said. "You're the invisible one, remember?" That word slammed into me. Invisible. I remembered being 13, sitting outside a foster intake office with a cracked Game Boy and a trash bag at my feet. I remembered the way they forgot my birthday 2 years in a row. The way Caroline once said, "Well, boys don't care about cards anyway." Cassia stepped back. "I'm not the villain here. I just adapted. It's how people survive." Then she walked away. Confident, unbothered, like she hadn't just gutted me with a smile. I left without saying another word. The sun was setting by the time I got home. I dropped my keys in the tray by the door, kicked off my shoes, and sank into the couch, still wearing my blazer. For a long while, I didn't move. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. Eventually, I pulled out a small, cloth-bound journal. It was worn soft around the edges. On the inside cover, my name, Rowan Miller, age 13. In pencil. I flipped to a page in the middle, one I remembered writing on the day I found out my parents had moved, without telling me. The sentence was scrawled in shaky handwriting. If I scream in a field and no one hears, does that mean I never screamed? I read it once, then again, then out loud. If I scream in a field and no one hears, does that mean I never screamed? No one had heard back then, but they hear me now. But hearing isn't the same as believing, and Cassia was already building her empire. 2 weeks later, I sat alone in a quiet, echoey hallway inside the Midland Conference Center downtown. My name tag read, Rowan Miller, External Reviewer. Under it, someone had written, "Thank you for your service," in red Sharpie. I was here on invitation, not as a speaker, not as a guest of Cassia's, but as an independent evaluator for the Regional Council's Community Innovation Fund. It was the biggest funding summit of the year. I'd worked with one of their partner nonprofits last winter, anonymously offering guidance on a youth housing proposal. Now they'd brought me in to review a finalist application for a multi-year grant. When I opened the evaluation folder, my hands stilled. The proposal title punched me in the chest. Bridge Pathways for Aged-Out Foster Youth. The words felt like they'd been pulled straight out of my bloodstream. Every single part, the metrics model, the 3-tier mentorship ladder, the transitional housing loop I'd mapped with blue ink at 3 a.m. 2 years ago, was mine. Even the phrasing in the opening paragraph, resilience should be met with infrastructure, not indifference. And then I saw the listed presenter, Cassia Baird. Of course, she hadn't just stolen my story, my name, or my voice. She had taken the blueprint of my life's work and plastered her name on it, polished just enough to pass as hers. I sat back, heart pounding, but face calm. The ballroom doors opened, and a wave of chatter flowed in. People found seats, passed programs, sipped coffee. A microphone screeched slightly as someone tested the sound. Then, a moment later, the lights dimmed and a council member took the podium. We now welcome our final presenter for the afternoon, Cassia Baird, representing the Youth Futures Initiative. Cassia walked up with poise, in a cream blazer and soft curls. She greeted the audience like an old friend. I stayed in the back, arms folded. She began, "What happens to children when the state lets go? When the funding stops, the beds close, and the silence returns? For some, the answer is homelessness. For others, incarceration. But I believe in another way." The click of her PowerPoint echoed in the room. As a former foster youth myself, she continued smoothly, I understand what it means to fall through the cracks. Bridge Pathways was built to catch them before the fall. I almost laughed. She had no idea how close she was to exposing herself. The council nodded thoughtfully, jotting down notes, clearly moved. She went on for 15 minutes, hitting every key point I'd drafted long before she'd even looked my way. Then came the QA. A man near the front, gray suit, wireframe glasses, raised his hand. "Cassia," he said. "I remember a similar proposal submitted to our incubator 2 years ago, through Northbridge. The ideas were nearly identical. It was filed under a pseudonym, R.T. Merrick. Are you familiar?" Cassia paused. Her smile faltered, just for a second. I believe that was an early draft I helped with," she replied. "A team effort. I refined it for implementation." The man frowned. "But R.T. Merrick submitted independently. There was no listed team. You weren't on the author list." Cassia's jaw twitched. "That may have been an oversight." I stood up from the back row. My voice was steady. There was no oversight. All eyes turned. "I'm R.T. Merrick," I said, stepping forward. "That's the name I used. I wasn't looking for applause, just for the idea to live. But I submitted that proposal. Alone." The room went silent. Cassia froze, hands stiff at her sides. I continued. "It wasn't a draft. It was a full framework. I didn't want recognition. I just wanted it to work." A beat passed. Then another. The council chair leaned forward. "Cassia, is this true?" Cassia's voice was faint. I thought he wouldn't care. The tension cracked. From the side row, I noticed movement. Mitchell, yes, Mitchell, my brother, stood slowly, arms crossed. Then he did something I never expected. He clapped, just once, then twice, and then he kept going. I stared at him, unsure if I was hallucinating. He looked directly at me and nodded. Silent, firm. One by one, others joined. The room erupted into applause. It wasn't loud or wild, but it was real. And it was for me. Caroline stood near the double doors in back. Her face was unreadable, lips pressed into a thin line. Then, without a word, she turned and walked out. I didn't stop her. I didn't even flinch. Afterward, people approached me quietly, hands outstretched. Some offered praise, others asked questions, but I kept mostly to myself, floating above the noise, still absorbing it all. By the time the room emptied, the sun was slanting low through the glass walls. I lingered near the hallway, trying to catch my breath in the stillness. A woman, mid-30s, sharp bob, holding a council folder, walked up to me. She looked vaguely familiar. You probably don't remember me, she said. I run Safe Step. We're small, over in Boone County. I smiled slightly. I've heard of it. We used your original draft last year, she continued. We got a city grant because of it. My heart skipped. She nodded, sincere. Your name matters, Rowan. Not just your story, but your work. Who you are. It's enough. I swallowed the knot forming in my throat. Thank you, I said softly. She smiled. Keep building. When she walked away, I stood there alone in the hallway, the weight of years settling, but not suffocating. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. They say being seen changes everything. But the truth is, even being seen doesn't erase the ache. It doesn't heal the years spent invisible, spoken over, quietly set aside. It just gives you enough air to finally decide what you want next. It had been nearly a month since that summit. Since I stood in that ballroom while Cassia's voice trembled and Mitchell clapped for the first time in my life like he saw more than just a shadow where his brother should have been. And yet, I wasn't celebrating. The applause faded quickly. The offers, the handshakes, even the praise. None of it meant what I thought it would. Because I still had to go home. Still had to sit with the old silence. That morning, I was up early. Too early. The sky was just turning that soft gray blue, the kind that promised a hot Kansas day ahead. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, nursing a mug of coffee, watching the condensation slide down the window pane. No headlines, no inbox notifications, no Cassia. Just the hum of the fridge and the birds waking up outside. And then, the knock. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't loud. But it wasn't neighborly either. 3 steady raps, a pause, then one more. I stood still, coffee suspended midair. Another knock. I moved slowly toward the door, my heartbeat not racing, but tightening. I looked through the peephole. There they were. Mitchell. Caroline. No Cassia. No SUV. No fanfare. Just them. Mitchell stood with his arms crossed, face tight like he was holding in more than he could say. Caroline looked older, not in years, but in weight, like something she'd been propping up had finally crumbled. I didn't open the door right away. I let them stand there in the chill of dawn. Let them sit in it. Then, without a word, I turned the lock and opened the door. The screen squeaked as it pushed out. Caroline was the first to speak, voice breaking before the second syllable. Rowan, she said, like my name hurt her throat. We didn't know what we were doing. I stayed silent. She stepped forward. You were always so quiet, so fine, and she Cassia, she always took up so much space. We got tired. We thought we had more time to fix it. I didn't move. Mitchell still hadn't said a word. Just stood there, jaw clenched, eyes flickering from the porch railing to my face. Caroline's voice cracked again. We didn't mean to lose you. We thought maybe we could still... I cut in. You didn't lose me because you made a mistake. They both looked up. You lost me because you kept walking away after. The wind stirred a leaf across the steps. The neighbor's dog barked once, then stopped. Mitchell shifted his weight, finally lifting his eyes. Is there anything we can do? He asked. I stared at him for a long time, not with anger, not even with pain, just clarity. You can leave. No yelling, no door slammed in their face, just that. Caroline opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else, but didn't. Mitchell gave a faint nod, maybe out of guilt, maybe relief. Then they turned, walked down the driveway. No goodbyes, no more promises, just gone. I didn't watch them reach the car. I didn't stand in the doorway hoping they'd turn back. I closed the door. And this time, I didn't feel like I was the one left behind. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen in my hand. The house was quiet, save for the creak of old wood settling. A single piece of paper lay in front of me. No envelope, just a heading. To the boy I was. I started writing, not to explain, not to vent, but to remember. I wrote about the first night in that strange foster home, staring up at a ceiling fan that creaked louder than the whispers in my chest. I wrote about the second birthday when the phone didn't ring. About the Christmas. I ate peanut butter crackers in silence while the other kids opened boxes of laughter. I wrote about the time I got straight A's and no one clapped. The night I walked across a stage, diploma in hand, and saw an empty seat where someone should have been proud. And I ended the letter with this. You were never invisible. You just had to wait long enough to see it for yourself. I folded the letter once, then tucked it between the pages of an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. Didn't need to send it. It wasn't for them. It was for me. The next morning, I stepped outside barefoot onto the front porch. The street was already alive. Kids chasing a basketball in the cul-de-sac, someone mowing a lawn 2 houses down, the mail carrier waving from the end of the block. A neighbor across the street called out, "Morning, Rowan!" I lifted my hand in return. Another neighbor, Marcia, I think, walked over and handed me a mason jar of lemonade. Made too much. Thought you might want a glass. I took it, smiling. Thanks. She nodded and left with no expectation. The air was still, but not empty. I stood there sipping the lemonade, tart and cool, and looked up. The sky was wide and plain. No signs, no messages, just sky. And for the first time, I didn't want anything from it. I wasn't waiting for answers, wasn't reaching for validation. I was already standing in the answer, and it was enough.